friends, and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Morgan and I am here in Wyoming in zone 4. And so everything is a little bit slower to put in the ground. So I have to really focus on starting little seedlings, and then we transplant them to go outdoors come mid to later May. So because our growing season is so short, I'm super passionate about starting our little seedlings, making sure I give the plants as big of a head start as possible. That way come late August, early September, right before our freezes, we can get as much fruit off the plants as possible. So today I just wanted to show you kind of how to know when to start potting up your little plants. So as you can see here, this is a slicing tomato, and this is these guys are pretty small still. So they have a lot of growing to do. You can see their roots aren't coming out. Everything looks fine. And so these pellets are going to be giving them enough nutrients, and they're able to hold enough water in order to support a little plant of this size. Whereas something like this tomato, she's getting really big, and it's really hard for me to, one, keep enough water in this little pellet, and two, to make sure she has enough nutrients in order to grow really big, really strong. So for me, it's time to start potting all of the plants that I've put into this container and also this container up into a larger container. So these are the plants that we started together a few videos back with just the seeds. You kind of watched me and I showed you what the planting process looked like with these Jiffy pellets. So if you want to go check that out, I'll put a link up here. But I wanted to show you kind of how I pot these. I know a lot of people have questions on whether you should pull the mesh down, if you should keep the mesh on. So I wanted to kind of show you what's worked for me over the past few years. So first and foremost, what I like to do is just get a little container, and I, as you can see, reuse these containers a lot. So it's important for me to cross off what was used to be on there and write what is now on there. So I'm gonna write jalapeno. And in these containers, I have in this one, I have two little tiny holes that are used for water and drainage. The way I got those is I just get a little tiny X-Acto knife. Be very careful if you choose to go this way. I'm not saying this is the best route. This is just what I do. So please be very, very careful. I just take the top of the X-Acto knife, I put the sharp edge in and twist, and then that will create a really nice little watering hole for me. So next, I just have some soil sitting here. I find this works best for me, especially when I have to do the potting up indoors. It's super, super windy right now, so I don't feel like it's appropriate to dry out my plants or put them in that kind of wind when they're just not used to those conditions yet. So I find that putting a bunch of potting soil, and this is pretty high quality potting soil, into a bucket and then getting it to the right consistency with water is kind of the best route to go. So all I do is I just take a spoon, I fill the entire cup just because we still have a little ways to go with this season before we can put them outside. So just fill the cup up with soil. And then I'm gonna take my plant, and this is kind of how you can determine if you should take the mesh off or not. So as you can see with this one, there's roots. There's a little bit of a root system, but I wouldn't say it's huge by any means. Let me see if I can find an example of a larger root system. So here's a good example. Versus this one, she has roots running all the way from the top down and then roots coming out the bottom. So for an example like this, I would just pull the mesh down halfway and then just cut that bit of mesh off and then leave the bottom mesh that's supporting all of these roots on. I've done this, I've planted a ton of plants with the mesh on, and I haven't had any issues. It's sometimes at the end of the season, you'll go and pull the onion, for example, out, and you will see the mesh is still on the root system. But I have had some of my largest onions, I'm talking a huge onion, grow with the roots through the mesh, and I have not had any issues. So in a situation like this, I will just leave the mesh on. Versus this little jalapeno, it really doesn't have a root system that's coming out of the mesh yet. So because its roots are still so small, I feel confident that I can get the mesh off without disturbing the plant. So in that situation, first thing I'm gonna do is just make a nice little crevice for me to put the plant in. I like to put it deeper than I think, just because it's easier to fill in than it is to pull it out when you have a plant in your hand. So then all I'll do is just rip the mesh, and I like to just kind of start like that and then rip around. And then when you get to a root, I just very loosely try to work the root out of the mesh. If you accidentally rip a root or break a root off, it's really not a big deal. It's gonna be just fine. But the least you can disturb the roots, the better. Okay, so as you can see, I was able to pull these little roots off, and then I still have the roots coming out of the top. So now all I'm gonna do is I like to just break a little bit, as long as there's not a root up here, I like to break a little bit of the soil off the top, just a little bit, just so that I can make it sit a little bit better in the soil. And then I just set it in the soil. I then will kind of push it down and then cover in the rest with soil. I like to make sure that it's packed in pretty well, but not too tight. That way, when you go to water it, the soil doesn't just completely move away. So here is what the final product looks like. As you can see, you really can't tell the pellet is in there anymore. It's just kind of become one with the rest of the soil. So that is literally all I do. I think the most important things to note is making sure you have really good drainage and that you have really high quality soil that you're putting into these, because that is literally all of the nutrition that your plants will be getting for this time. Then all I'm gonna do is just put these down under my grow lights, which I will take you down there right now and kind of show you where all of our seedlings are and how they're all doing. So I'll put these under the grow lights and leave them there. You can definitely put a fan on your plants when you start hardening them off. That's just to get them used to the wind. I highly recommend that here in Wyoming. It's super important because we have so much wind. You have to make sure that your plants are learning to be strong enough before you just throw them out there and hope for the best. So now that we've got these two done, I'll get the rest of these planted up, but let's jump downstairs and I will show you how the rest of our seedlings are looking. Okay, so as you can tell, we have a ton of onions, and that's because we enjoy onions the most. I really believe that if you're gonna start a garden, you need to start planting the things that you enjoy the most and are the most passionate about. So for us, onions is one of those things we have in every single meal, so we've started a ton of onion plants. The next tray that we have here is a lot of squash, zucchini. These aren't things that you traditionally need to start indoors, but because our growing season is so short, we do. So here we have some cucumbers, I have pumpkins, there's watermelon, honeydew, cantaloupe, another pumpkin. So we find that pumpkins, squash, those things that last really well are also things that we like to grow and are things that help our animals. So for our goats, pumpkins are dewormers naturally. So we love to grow a lot of pumpkins. That way we can throw them out to the goats come the fall and they can enjoy the pumpkin and we can save on medicine costs. We can reduce the amount of medicine that we're giving them and we can make sure that they are having healthy and happy guts. So that's another way that we kind of figure out what we want to grow. We also have a lot of tomatoes, some okra started, and those are all going really well. The tomatoes that we did start together, we went out of town that next weekend and I forgot to put the lid on them, so they dried out and they were no good. So I was able to salvage a few of them, probably 12 or so pepper and tomato plants out of those trays, but as you could see upstairs when we were up potting, I did have to start new tomato plants over. So that was a bummer, but I feel like that's just kind of how gardening goes. Next, I wanted to give you an update on our sweet potato slips. So here's that sweet potato that we started together in the just shoebox. you should be able to see here and here. Those are sweet potato slips. I was super discouraged, thinking it wasn't gonna work this year, when all of a sudden I looked into the bottom of the container and we had a wild root system growing, as you can see here. So these are going really well. It's pretty chilly down here. We're not running the pellet stove anymore just because temperatures outside don't require it. So it is a little bit chillier down here, and that's why these slips are going pretty slow. I definitely should have started them even earlier. So that's a note that I'll make for myself next year, that even, you know, maybe December, January is the time that I need to start the sweet potatoes. But I was super excited to see that slips were growing on this one. And then let me grab the glasses and I will show you how those sweet potatoes are growing. Okay, so here is that glass sweet potato, and this has gone wild. So this is just the root system that it's grown in the bottom, and then you should be able to see here over on the side the slip that has started. So it's definitely a lot less slips. I think more are coming. There's even roots, you know, coming out of the side, and this slip does have one really, really long root on it here. So this has worked really well. It's been quicker than the shoebox, but it's grown less slips. So I would probably do both of them again next year. I think it's just been really fun to kind of change out the water every few days and just keep an eye on it. I think it's so cool that, you know, just out of a grocery store sweet potato, we can grow these. So I think it's been super fun. I do have sweet potato slips that I ordered back in December on their way as well. Just was kind of an insurance policy on them. So I'll have those to plant as well. So we'll have more than, you know, 3 or 4 sweet potato slips going into the ground. So that's my update for today. I really appreciate you guys coming along and joining me and taking a look at kind of where the garden stands. I do plan on keeping everything down here for the most part until mid-May, like I mentioned. So a few things that I'm doing for maintenance is just keeping the onions trimmed. As you can see, I try to keep them right around the 3-inch mark. That way the root system can grow and can really focus on growing a big bulb rather than a really nice green. So I need to get down here and get trimming on some of these onions, but I mean, they are super healthy. They're all doing really, really well. And I'm super, super pleased with the progress here, especially since these all just started with the seeds. So thank you guys so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up and consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for joining. Bye.